What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the College Football Show here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. He is Andrew Destin. I'm Noah Hiles, and we are once again coming to you here to talk about some college football. The season is down to the nitty-gritty. Only a couple games left. I think it's always weird how they play the playoff games and then they play the other Power 5 or the New Year's 6 bowl games. And then they'll have like one bowl game of like a MAC school versus a Conference USA school. They're both like 6-6. And then they have the FCS championship and then the national championship. But the college football season, Andrew, is almost complete.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful one at that, truly. And, you mentioned that format. It always does catch me off guard a little bit because I end up seeing the box scores around the country, watching the ticker going, oh, wow, they're still playing those on January 6th. That caught me for a spin. But truly, all around a great college football season, certainly a fun one for me to cover on my end with this Penn State team, the way this season capped off. But all around, just a great season, across college football, across the different Power 5 schools. We had some great parity, and I think that's what stood out was that aside from maybe a Georgia, there hasn't been a truly, truly dominant team. And, competitiveness, that's why we watch this sport, right? So
yeah, and Georgia itself has played in a lot of close games, including its most recent one, which we'll talk about in a bit. But first, I think we need to recap both of our bowls that we covered. Two classics, really. Well, I think Pitt's was more of a classic. Penn State's was just more significant considering it was its first Rose Bowl win since both you and I were on this earth. So that's pretty cool. We'll start with the Sun Bowl just because it was the first of the two. Andrew, I'm not sure if you had a chance to watch this game, but my goodness, that and obviously I'm biased because I was there in attendance for it. But I think it's a top 5 bowl this year. I think it's probably, I talked to people in El Paso, local media there, just Sun Bowl staff who had been to, 15, 20 plus Sun Bowls. They said it was probably the best Sun Bowl ever. Aside from maybe, I think one in 1994 is the only Sun Bowl to ever go into overtime. But aside from that, they said that was probably the best one ever. And it's hard to disagree. That was just a very fun game. So many great storylines, and just an absolute blast to cover. The people in El Paso did a great job hosting everyone from Pitt and UCLA. And so for when we review these games, rather than breaking everything down, especially for this one because it's been almost a week since it was played, we'll just give our biggest takeaway. My biggest takeaway from the Sun Bowl is, not a lot of teams can say that their bowl victory really mattered. That bowl win mattered for Pitt because what it's going to allow the Panthers to do is it's going to probably allow them to finish the year ranked. They end their season on a 5-game win streak after going 4-4. They proved that this year wasn't. They proved that last year wasn't just Kenny Pickett magic. That they have talented players and that they can consistently win 9 games a year now, and they can beat talented teams on a national stage. And they knocked off a really good UCLA team who, with the exception of one player, had its entire roster really out there on the field. So I think my biggest takeaway was that was Pitt's biggest win of the season. In a game that everyone will call irrelevant or an exhibition or whatever, Pitt got its biggest win of the year on a national stage in the Sun Bowl, and it's going to finish the year looking back and saying this was a successful season. It could have been better, but a 9-4 season finishing ranked with a Sun Bowl victory, that's pretty good. And so that's my big takeaway for Pitt. Do you have anything you want to say on the Sun Bowl before we get on the Rose Bowl?
Oh, yeah. Sun Bowl, a lot of history there. You talk about the CBS broadcast. It's always been a nationally televised game. It's always a picturesque setting. I know you got to take in the scenery there, just nestled in the mountains. I've never been out to El Paso, but I've had family go out for the Sun Bowl before, and they've all spoken greatly about it before. So I'm sure you enjoyed those surroundings there too.
It was the best. Everything about it was fantastic. I can't say enough about it. Just from the people, the views, the game itself, just all of it. It's awesome. So Andrew, I'm sure you had yourself quite a time in Pasadena as well. Take us through your experience of the Rose Bowl and take us through your biggest takeaway in Penn State's victory over the Utes.
Yeah, the Rose Bowl, what a turnaround for me after covering a couple of Penguins games to close out the year 2022, then flew back out to California where I'm from and always good for me on a personal level. I mean, the Rose Bowl is a spot I've been to. That was my third Rose Bowl now that I've been to in person, fourth time seeing a game there. And we've got a lot of family who was out there for the event. Obviously, being from out in that state, so that's always a special moment for me. And the Rose Bowl experience itself, I think this really changed the narrative of two people who are the most important people in the Penn State football program right now, and that's in James Franklin and Sean Clifford. Now, Franklin still has some work to do with respect to Michigan and Ohio State getting over those hurdles. But for Clifford, you want to talk about a legacy that is changed drastically in the minds of Penn State fans. It's the way that he went out in this game and the way that he finished off his Penn State career, because we've heard it all, right? The 6 years, how he's been here for so long and never really achieved anything, beating Michigan or Ohio State. And then this game in the Rose Bowl, going out the way he did, playing the way he did. My biggest takeaway is I think Penn State fans are going to remember him a lot more fondly than they might have thought they would back in October.
Yeah, I mean, what a nice ending for him. Obviously, you weren't watching the television broadcast because you were covering the game, but they really did a good job of capturing his emotion. You know, when he got subbed out there late in the fourth quarter and just seeing every one of those teammates seemingly greet him on the sideline with a big hug, and goes to show, you know, we're not going to see a lot more Sean Cliffords in the world of college football, I don't think.
No.
Just guys who are around and start for so many years, play so many meaningful games, and have those highs and lows of a career. I feel like, you know, in today's world of college football, a couple low moments and it's time to pack up shop and change your scenery. Especially when they bring in a 5-star to back you up. Right. And it was a really cool ending for a guy who finishes his career tied with Trace McSorley as the winningest quarterback in one of the country's top programs historically. My big takeaway from the Rose Bowl, two things. One, that Utah touchdown at the end was pretty special. We'll just leave it at that. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that. That made me and many others pretty happy, I would say. Got to love them playing through the whistle, 60-minute football.
That's what we're here for.
And the second thing I have to say is Penn State, there's probably never been a time since Franklin's been here, I believe, where fans have as much of a reason to be optimistic. I mean, they're coming off an 11-win Rose Bowl season, and the future is really, really bright. When you look at what they have returning at quarterback, you know, with what has a chance to be probably their most talented quarterback since who knows when, a really long time.
Yeah.
Right. Since at least the Paterno era. And, you know, what they have coming back in the backfield, what they could potentially be bringing in through the portal at receiver, and most importantly, the biggest weakness in Franklin's whole time here is the offensive line. That's getting significantly upgraded as well. And the defense is also going to be good. So I just think that, there's a lot of reason for Penn State fans to be genuinely excited, especially if Harbaugh leaves Michigan and you see where Ohio State's at. The Big Ten is within reasonable grasp within these next couple seasons if you're the Nittany Lions. So, and that's where we'll transition to next is a season recap here, and we'll keep it with Penn State. Do you feel like, Andrew, that's the big takeaway for the Nittany Lions this year, that they kind of took that next step as a program? They're not on Ohio State and Michigan's level yet, but they're really knocking at the door.
Yeah, I think so. That's the biggest takeaway, is that the Michigan ceiling we've seen is a lot higher than people might have imagined earlier on in the Harbaugh era. So that's certainly something to be concerned about. But from a Penn State perspective, if you're a fan, this is as excited as you should be really since 2017. And the reason I bring that year up and not 2016 is because that Rose Bowl season kind of came out of nowhere for a lot of people. The long winning streak, they lost to Pitt to start off that year. You know, that was not a team that was perceived as being on the cusp of being great, of being elite. That 2017 team with Saquon Barkley was pretty darn close. They couldn't quite get over the hump, but I think what you're looking at next year is something similar to that season with that kind of expectation going into it, especially with that young talent you mentioned. And I guess to recap the season in that regard, Noah, obviously the losses to Michigan and Ohio State, those are still the benchmarks. Those are still the bellwether schools in the conference. And so for Penn State to lose those, that's certainly an indictment on their season in general. But I think what you saw was a concerted effort by James Franklin, and I know he talked about this from July onward, was to have legitimate depth, to have guys that it could go to down the roster, and to have younger players that he could lean upon that now moving forward are bigger contributors earlier on in their career, and they're better prepared to be on the field. And we saw so many talented freshmen. I mean, your Abdul Carter at linebacker, both the running backs, true freshmen, and Drew Aller as well when he flashed at times coming in for Clifford. So the name of the game this year, it was depth, it was going young, and it's only going to go well for Penn State moving forward because now they have all that kind of experience to lean upon going into 2023.
MVP of the season for Penn State.
Ooh, gotta go with Nicholas Singleton on that one. I mean, you could really give it to the offensive line group and by itself, but I think you got to go to the running back Singleton, who with that run in the Rose Bowl, now over 1,000 yards on the season, got to go with Singleton with that one.
Yeah, and that's one of those moments where when a young player will have that big play where everyone can point back at, and you'll say that was his coming out thing. And he had games, obviously. I would say his second game of his collegiate career was his coming out party or whatever. But to the national audience, that run, everyone's going to remember that run next year when Nick Singleton is revered as one of the top running backs in the country. So that was a big moment for him, I think. So we'll go over to Pitt now. My biggest takeaway in the Pitt season is kind of like what you said. It's the Panthers' depth, where in addition to people who believe last year was just the Kenny Pickett magic year and everything, it could also be argued that this group, this senior class, was just the one wave that brought Pitt success. If you look, they have Pitt's not normally a team that you'll see have 6-7 NFL draft picks. That could very well be the case this year. And they had that a couple years ago. And last year they had two guys, one of them being Pickett, but this year again. And it's starting to show that they really are becoming a legit program. They're not in the Penn State, which I would say is up next tier, and they're definitely not on the top tier, but they're right beneath them. They're in that group between 20 and 40. And there's so much parity in that group where, one bad loss can drop you from 20 to the back end, close to the high 30s or low 40s as far as the hierarchy of college football. And their recruiting rankings aren't there. But what Pitt has shown the ability to do is to develop talent and to keep talent around, where other programs lose guys to the transfer portal. And Pitt certainly did with some players, but no one really that drastic. After Jordan Addison, which is probably the biggest loss of the season aside from Caleb Williams in the transfer portal. But after he left, everyone else stayed put. And you look at these guys who have been sitting on the bench behind 3-4-year starters on the offensive line, defensive line, at linebacker, at receiver, all of these places. They've waited their turn. And when their number was called at some point in the season, be it Rodney Hammond Jr. filling in for Izzy Abanikanda against Syracuse and running for 124 yards and a touchdown. Be it Nick Patty in the Sun Bowl, a 5-year backup, finally getting his moment and making the most of it. Be it whoever else. You could point to Javen McIntyre coming in and starting for Brandon Hill and in the final two games or in the final game making an interception, also having an interception against Miami. Deion Hayes coming in and getting reps at defensive end and making an effort. There are so many guys who waited their turn, and they didn't need to. They could have gone elsewhere and probably started earlier, but they waited their turn, they developed, and they made the most of their time. And that depth is something for Pitt fans to be excited about, because Pitt has always had talented players, but if that player were to go down, there wasn't much sitting behind him on the bench. And that seems to change now, and that's the difference between a 7-8 win team and an 8-9 win team and possibly a 10-win team on a good year, which Pitt looks to be trending toward. My MVP for the season for Pitt, real quick as well, is Israel Abanikanda. Just probably, you hope to cover those magic seasons as a sports writer, and what Izzy did this year was fun. It was fun. He's I think he'll be remembered as like a bit of a flash in the pan as far as Pitt history goes, just because the Panthers have had so many great running backs. 1 and 2, his magic season coincided with a unanimous All-American on the defensive side of the ball. It was also 1 year after one of the best individual seasons Pitt has seen since Larry Fitzgerald. So I don't know how well he'll be remembered, but I hope that fans do remember just truly how special he was on an offense that at times simply could not throw the football. He carried the team on his back sometimes scoring. There was a stretch where I think he scored like 15 touchdowns in a row for Pitt or something like that. It's truly remarkable and a really fun year covering him. So we'll move on now to the bowl season recap here as we finish up the show. Andrew, this bowl season has been fun. It's a tough year to be one of the haters that says, why do they even play these games? Well, it's because it turns out the guys who do suit up really still care about them. We saw that in the Sun Bowl. We saw that in, I believe it was the Alamo Bowl. We saw that in the Cotton Bowl. Holy cow, what a game that was. I'll ask you, what was the best college football bowl game that we've seen this year? And we'll even include the playoffs if you want to bring those in there.
Yeah, you tipped it off right there with the Cotton Bowl. That was one that truly caught me for a spin as somebody who, covering this game, the Rose Bowl, Penn State, Utah, watched a lot of film from the Utah versus USC Pac-12 championship game, as well as the time when those two teams met earlier in the regular season. And man, oh man, was I impressed by Utah just because they were able to get over the hump against USC. But man, Tulane, I mean, you want to talk about a great storyline. The turnaround, the year, going after 2-10 the year before, and now qualifying for a New Year's Six and pulling this off. So the ride from the Green Wave was something that was really fun to watch and really fun to monitor. And just, there are a few moments, I guess, you can remember well, in particular from being in the press box when you're covering a game like that, the Rose Bowl. It all can kind of mesh together as one, just by the nature of it. But I will say the crowd, all on hand, was quite pleased when they were showing that on the video screen there at the Rose Bowl. Everybody was pleased to see the Trojans go down. Penn State and Utah fans had one thing to bond over, I guess you could say, that one day.
I enjoyed, someone tweeted, if Jordan Addison wanted to spend his last collegiate season on a team whose best win was UCLA, he should have just stayed at Pitt. I thought that was a very clever comment, although I can't blame him. I think his bank account would look a little different had he stuck around in Oakland, which, I respect him for going out there. But regardless, that it's hard to argue against that for being the best game. But just for the sake of having something different, I'll go with the Peach Bowl. I mean, that game, Georgia, Ohio State, an all-time classic. And that's one where the game was great, but the moment behind it with the new year clock counting down side by side. I was at the sports book in Pittsburgh at the casino, and on one TV, they had the countdown in Times Square, New York, and it's 10, 9. And then you see Ohio State's kicker taking his steps, getting lined up, and you're like, wow, this is like out of a movie or something.
Right.
And the kick sails wide left, mind you, right when the ball drops. I mean, that was something special. Ohio State, I mean, just a really gutsy performance. I know Ryan Day took a lot of flack with, another loss to Michigan and everything, but and clearly the guys didn't get the job done against Georgia, but I think he needs to be commended for having his team ready to fight. That's the best fight anyone's put up against Georgia in, I think, probably 2 years. And, other teams have taken them down to the wire. I know Alabama beat them in the SEC title game last year, which, let's be real, Georgia really did not care at all in that game. But like in a game where Georgia really clearly was playing all out, that's the best I've seen anyone really, really push them. I mean, Ohio State kind of blew that game at the end or whatever, but tremendous fight. And I think Coach Day needs to be commended for that. That was a fantastic football game. And on that note, we'll just talk about the other game, Andrew, and just your thought overall. It's, the playoff, since it's really existed, has not been that exciting. The first year it happened, it was exciting when Florida State lost to Oregon and Ohio State upset Alabama. After that, it's pretty much been blowouts in the semifinals, and then every now and then we get a decent final. This year was different. I mean, this was clear. They got the correct 4 teams, and they seeded it appropriately. Both games, I think, were really fun to watch.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the Michigan game, you could honestly even make the same argument as you made for Ohio State, that they could have won that game. For me, watching that Michigan TCU contest, it just, the whole time I kept thinking, all right, they're down 2 scores. They're down 3 scores. Eventually, Michigan's going to figure this out, come back and overcome all these turnovers, all these mistakes they've made. They just weren't able to completely make the Titanic comeback. And, all credit in the world to the TCU team. I know this is just something they've heard all year long about, they're barely squeaking out wins. They're not really that good. Wait till they play a real team. Well, they played a real team in Michigan. They certainly did there. And, I still think Michigan's the better team and would have given a better chance against that Georgia team. But, wow, they really kept it close there for sure. And, surprised the Wolverines didn't pull it off. Definitely some questionable coaching there from Jim Harbaugh toward the end, too, with the timeout. Clock management. I don't know if I completely agree with him on the way he handled that ending.
No, I don't think I did either. But I mean, props to TCU because that's the only way TCU was winning that game.
Yeah,
was by coming out, punching them in the mouth early, and just not letting their foot off the gas. If they had one hiccup, and they allowed Michigan to crawl back into it, but Duggan and company refused to let that pace slow down. And for every Michigan response, TCU had an answer. And sometimes that came on the defensive side of the ball or on special teams. But whatever it was, I mean, they always responded. That was a complete team win. And that's exactly how the Horned Frogs needed to win that game. And that's how they're going to need to beat Georgia as well. I don't know if that's happening, but yeah. I mean, hey, crazier things have happened, I guess, in college football. I saw that spread opened up to be 13.5. We're entering like I don't know. Has there ever been a college football championship in the BCS playoff era with that big of a spread?
Feels like there can't be. The only ones I can think of that were substantial spreads was, Florida versus Ohio State in that playoff or that championship game back in 2007, I think it was. But even then it was like as a 7.5 point favorite. Nothing to this degree. This is truly one-sided, and dare I say the spread may even feel a little bit too low. I mean, not to get into that territory, but just,
right.
It's this Georgia team is that impressive.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that, hey, like this TCU team just carved up a Michigan defense that shut down Ohio State, who put 41 up against the Dogs. And if they had a good kicker, probably would have beat them. So yeah. I don't know. It just seems like that's a lot of points, but Georgia's also a really good team. So we'll wrap up the show, Andrew. What's your prediction? National championship game score?
Yeah, kind of tipped my hand with my comments there, but I got Georgia in a lopsided one. I got Bulldogs winning 42-17 against TCU. Just not enough on that side of the ball on defense for TCU to keep that offensive attack from Georgia and what they do running the ball, what they do with their tight ends in check. Yeah, give me Georgia by 25, 42-17.
I'm going to go Georgia big as well, 41-27. I think then that score might be a little misleading. I think the Dogs get ahead early. I think a lot of us are like, oh, damn, this is boring. And then maybe TCU will get a couple of scores in the fourth quarter to make those who take the Bulldogs with the points a little nervous. But I think a 2-score victory is completely reasonable to believe with how good this Georgia team is. Andrew, any final thoughts before we wrap things up?
Just looking forward to kicking up the heels on Monday night and checking that one out. I know being out at LAX as I was yesterday before coming out here to Las Vegas for the Penguins game was that in LAX they had all the banners up there getting ready for the championship game. They're having it at SoFi, and that's a wonderful place to see a game. Truly impressive site they got there. So that'll look impressive on TV.
Did you see the email saying there's no tailgating?
Yeah, saw that one, and that's ridiculous.
Good luck telling that to Georgia fans. Yeah,
no shot. And
you literally have to go to a different state for their biggest rivalry game because the tailgate is so big.
Yeah, come on. They call it that. I mean, largest cocktail party. But
right.
They have plenty of space there. I can't believe they're not letting tailgating happen.
I completely agree. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Follow us on social media and keep tuning in. We'll have more sports content here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. Take care.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.